Welcome everybody to our panel, Mapping Your YA Novel. My name is Elizabeth Whitton, and I'll be moderating this amazing panel. Before I let them introduce themselves, I have some interesting facts that you should know. And they don't know I'm going to do this, so it may be the time I'm their moderator. But anyway, I will let you know, and then at the end of the panel, they can fess up if they want. I found out by reading a style interview in February that one of our panelists for a while earned a living as a belly dancer. Yes. I also found out in my research that we have a panelist who is a consummate baker and specializes in animal-shaped macaroons. That I have to see. And finally, one of our panelists was the voice of Sailor Neptune in the Sailor Moon anime series. Yes. So there you go. Just a note, they're not all what they seem to be. Anyway, we'll deal with that at the end of the session. I'm going to let each panelist introduce themselves, tell us about projects they're working on or what they've just finished, where you can buy their books. And I'll just start. As I said before, my name is Elizabeth Whitton. I like to write YA and adult speculative fiction. My YA novel, Houses of the Old Blood, won the 2018 Aurora Award for Best YA Novel. And I'm going to be releasing the second book in that series in the fall, in launch. That book will be called The Gold Flame of Seneca. And finally, my short story, The Grass Gods, is going to be appearing in the graphic goth, or the Prairie Gothic anthology. It's an anthology of Canadian writers, and it's just, the writers in that anthology are brilliant. So that will be released at a perfect time in October, so maybe you might want to go check that out. Finally, you can buy my book on Amazon, and there's also, you can find a link to buy it on the shared author table on the When Words Collide website. Okay, we're going to start with our panelists. Paul, would you like to go first?
Sure. Can everyone hear okay?
I can hear you, yeah.
Oh, great. I'm Paul Coccia, and I'm the author of Cub. So you can see sort of the cover there. It's my debut YA novel, and it's about a 17-year-old chubby gay baker who enters a cooking competition, and the celebrity chef is more interested in how things will heat up outside the kitchen, and how far will he go in order to launch his career. And just over the last few months, I've been co-authoring with Eric Walters, kind of a low YA, like towards the younger age, top of middle grade novel. It involves basketball, which Eric quickly realized I knew nothing about. So that was fun. And in February next year, I'll be having a book out with Lorimer, which will be another high-low. And high-lows are high interest, low literacy.
Thanks, Paul. He's very modest. He was I believe your book, Cub, was a pick for, what was it, 49th Street Pride?
Oh, 49th Shelf, yeah.
Yeah, or 49th Shelf, right, which is Amazon, right? And yeah.
I have to figure things out. I'm so new. Sometimes people say things, I'm like, what's going on?
So yeah, and also Paul's an MFA, Master in Fine Arts. So yeah, there you go.
And it is in writing, so it's relevant to what we're talking about.
That's why you're here. Diane, do you want to go?
Sure. I'm Diane Tirana. I am the executive editor at The Rights Factory, a Toronto lit agency. I teach in the creative writing program at U of T, SCS, and for a while I was the co-publisher of an online lit mag called Don't Talk to Me About Love. And this is my book, The World on Either Side, a YA novel that came out last September.
Diana, wasn't that book on CBC Picks or something? I think, wasn't there a CBC bestsellers list or something?
I don't think it was on CBC, but it was on another list, and I can't think. It was a notable book, an American list, and I can't think the name right now. But yes, it was a notable book.
Yeah, and the Calgary bestseller list, Diane.
Oh yeah,
that's right. It was #1 in the Calgary Herald bestseller list.
Yeah, you can get your book at the Owl's Nest. Her book is at the Owl's Nest. I know that.
That's right.
Okay, Barbara.
Hi, everybody. I'm Barbara Radecki, and I'm also a YA author. And my first book is The Dark House. and that was released in 2016. And my most recent book is Messenger 93. And that was released last April, or just this past April. So releasing a book in the pandemic is quite something. And these are both YA with protagonists in the 16-17 age range. And The Dark House, which was my debut, it made a number of lists, including CBC Best Books for Young Readers, 1 in 5 for YA for 2016. And I was nominated or shortlisted for the Kobo Emerging Writer Prize. And so there you go.
And Barbara, your books are at Owl's Nest as well, right?
Oh, yes. And so they're at Owl's Nest. They're available through indie bookstores. They're available on Amazon. Yes, thank you. Thank you for that.
You're hanging out with me on the shared authors table, right? And then
We are. Yeah.
Yeah. And he has all sorts of links to places you can buy his book as well. Okay, let's move on to our first question. What exactly is structured a novel, and when is the time to focus on it? So I'll start with Diane, and if you can just tell us, what that means to you and sort of maybe what your process is, and we'll just move on.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Structuring my novel is something I actually learned from Barbara Radecki when I first come into my class as a guest speaker 3 years ago. I was an editor, and I looked at structure, but not in any comprehensive way. So after Barbara came into my class, I took careful note of her handouts and her notes and her lecture, and I started applying it more to my editing. So when I'm editing a book and I'm in the middle of it and it's falling apart or it's rambling, now I go to structure. I wait until then, until I need it, because that's sort of how I use it as a writer. I'm more of an organic writer. I get an idea and I start writing. And at a certain point, I will take a look at the chart, the map, and say, have I ticked off this? Have I ticked off that? But I usually wait until I'm flailing around in the middle or until I've reached the end and I'm going through it again.
Oh, maybe you can tell us about your process.
Sure.
What it means
So
to you.
writing high-lows is kind of interesting because I didn't actually write the book before I sold it. So I had to sell on a pitch and an outline, and
Heard of.
with a high-low, you can do it. So it's a great way if people are looking to break in, and you don't necessarily want to invest it because they're short books. But in saying that, you really have to show an editor that you're able to handle character, you're able to handle plot and climax and tensions building. In a short book, it's like a short story. There's not room to hide. You can't hide behind a word count. You can't say, well, this will develop in 30 pages. You've only got 100 pages plus, like 100 to 120. You really need to nail it. So I am a plantser.
You're a plantser.
Plantser. I know there's pantsers and plotters. I'm right in the middle, and I've taken like 5 quizzes. So I trust them now.
It's like this high-low concept is really interesting to me. So there, these books, the topics that they're focused towards people that would interest YA writers, but you kind of write them in sort of a lower reading level, so it's more accessible. Is that how that works?
Yeah, so they're great for people who are, we call them sometimes emerging readers or discerning readers. It depends who's speaking, what terminology they use.
Mm-hmm.
But they're usually kids or people who just haven't developed a relationship with books. So the writers are really aware of wanting them to succeed. You get shorter sentences, you get simpler words, but good story and good character. And if that's not good, you're going to be called out on it really fast.
Yeah, so that's a challenging group to write for, but it's really, I don't know, it's almost like a cause in a way, right? Because you're bringing those.
Everyone I know loves these readers and loves these books, so that's kind of great.
That's awesome, Paul. Okay, Barbara, the expert. I happen to know
The expert.
You taught this very course at the University of Toronto, right?
Yeah, School of Continuing Studies, and I forgot to mention that in my spoken bio, because of course that is something that I am doing, is teaching structure, because that was my greatest struggle as an author. I kept writing what I was getting feedback that my stories were strong, good writing, all that sort of stuff, but the ideas rather were strong, but the stories kept flailing. And so I was working and rewriting, and at the same time making writers groups and connecting with other writers and reading their works, and able to see a little bit more objectively that where many writers flail is not so much in the great idea, is not so much in the beautiful writing, it's in the structure, that the structure is somehow soft or not compelling or not driving enough, and that's why you can't get to that next level of selling a book. And so I really focus my attention on how to structure, although I am very much a free flow writer. So it was very weird for me to actually go, okay, well, what does structure mean? And what's going to help me structure my book in order to get it to the point where I can get it sold, published? And what I noticed was that if, first of all, timing is everything. So we can talk about that in more detail if you want, but the timing of events will give you your specific individual story structure that will work for each one of you as writers. There's my structure that's going to work for me, and there's the structure that's going to work for every single book that's written. That's not a formula, but it's how it impacts the readers, how you grab the readers, and how you impact the reader. And in YA, it's so important to have a structure that the reader can really land on. And the two ways I do that, or I teach that, is I'm aware of 6 major events that will happen in the story, so that I'm conscious of the fact that the story will somehow hopscotch from big event to big event to big event that will all be related to each other, so that you're not sort of wandering on all these different directions. And another great recommendation is to be aware of what the big question is that you're asking in your story, whether it's, what would happen if my character was in this situation? Or what does it mean to be in a socially unjust world? Like whatever big question it is that you might be bringing to your story, you can use that to drive through your story so that you're on one track and not on 10 tracks that are running in tandem with each other, that you're staying on one track. You can go off on these little satellites, but that the track from beginning to end is strong and clear. And that's what I think readers are looking for, and that's what publishers are looking for. So
you're saying be faithful to that main plot line?
Yeah.
And always make sure that's central to your story.
Exactly. And when you get lost or confused, or when you really want to include a scene that maybe isn't exactly connected to your plot line, but you really love it or want to include it, is there a way to tie it to that track so that it's connected to that main story somehow?
Brilliant. Hey, is your course online? Like, can people?
Well, now it is. So it used to be that it wasn't live, and Diane, same thing. So we've had to migrate online because of the pandemic. So now we're teaching people from all over the world.
You both online. If the attendees want to get more in depth, maybe consider that. Go to the U of T, Continuing Studies?
School of Continuing Studies.
That's the only gift from co-ed, isn't it? That we realize that our world doesn't have to be, narrowed down to one city. We can actually go study in Toronto.
That's right.
With some amazing instructors. Okay, let's move on to the next one. There's so much we could just talk about there, but we'll just move on to another question. What role does structure play in character development? And maybe, Paul, you wouldn't mind starting us off with that, because that's so important in YA for your stuff.
I actually start with characters. So I start with a strong sense of who the character is, what they want, and also what they need. So I will refer to my book, Cub. It's about Theo is the main character, and one of his biggest issues in the beginning is deferral of his dreams. So he's always saying, one day I'll achieve this, and it's really tied into his body image. So
oh, wow. That's so great for YA. Like, that's such a...
And there's so few books with chubby boys who...
I love it, yeah.
Who aren't seen as unattractive, and the solution to the problem is them losing weight. Losing weight for Theo is not going to change the problems of the book.
That's such a universal thing. So it's not like your book is just for gay boys, right? It's such a universal thing that the girls and boys face, in our culture. So that makes, it sounds like a very relevant book.
Yeah, and then I had to kind of think about plot, because I am using a cooking competition. So I think we just blew our one interesting fact. No, I'm the belly dancer. Everyone knows I've got the belly for it.
All right. I'm sorry I interrupted.
That's okay. I actually ended up with a chart because I needed to know round by round through the competition who was active as a participant,
Cool.
what they were cooking, what the challenge of each round was. So that actually helped structure a lot because I actually had to build in that structure of the competition. And there were
Wow.
4 rounds, the last one being dessert, of course, because you always end with dessert. Um, and it was then also, how does the relationship with the celebrity chef interact with that? So when am I going to introduce that chef? I didn't actually introduce him in the first round, which was quite conscious as a choice. I didn't want him in the novel too soon.
Oh, that's the interesting thing, you know, in your structure and your pacing. You know, you don't have to bring everybody in at once, right? You can bring them in.
And with a high-low, you really want to use some short story tricks, and I'm calling them tricks, but they're really like craft elements. Limit your characters, because you just don't have a big word count. If a character can do double duty, make them do double duty. So I had a host who was just the host, and I'm like, let's have him be a foil to the celebrity chef. Let's have an adult character doing what they should. So I really had to tie in how the character was doing things with the competition and with what was going on. So the structure was really important in just getting it right. And then when I sat down to write, because I'm not typically a plotter, I had a cheat sheet. So that working on an outline, working on a plot beforehand really made it so you just sit down, you get to write, and if you're stuck, you can look at it and be like, that's where I need to go now.
You guys, you know, you're somebody just asked in our Q&A, and it's a good point. Like, you know, this is really information dense, right? And you could go so far with this. Is there places on your websites they can go to? Like, are you, or would it be best to take the courses, or are there notes? Will you guys be anything like that, or?
That's actually, it's a very interesting question because I've been actually toying with the idea of maybe doing a YouTube channel where people could come in and ask questions about story structure, and I might post but I haven't done it yet, so I can't, I do have a YouTube channel, so if you go and subscribe to that might give me the momentum and the incentive to do.
Why not? So the person who answered that question, why don't you just follow the websites or get on newsletters for our panelists here and anyone else who's interested, and they'll let you know about, you know, if they're going to be offering something that will, you know.
And I don't know if this helps people, but typically when people talk about plot and structure, they're looking at the 3-act plot structure, which is really easy to Google. And sometimes there's a 7-point plot structure, which is also very easy to Google. You'll get charts, you'll get explanations. They are helpful in assessing a work.
So it sounds like you just have to be very aware, like with your plot structure, you just have to be very aware that you are going to stick to it and be very intentional about where you put things and how you develop your characters.
That's all. You want to be surprised and let the writing go where it goes. You know, you don't want to take the magic out of the work.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hey, well, let's move on to Barbara now. You can be second. What about?
Well, so it's so interesting that you were asked the question about character, because I was going, you know, how, because when I teach it and when I discuss character, of course, it is the number one. I mean, that without a character being there and vibrant on the page, the reader isn't going to want to read more. But it's so interesting to me because if I were to answer truthfully about my own experience with my 2 books, I actually, I discover the character and follow the story. So that's maybe a little bit backwards, and maybe it should be the other way around. I mean, I probably would recommend that. But in my actual experience for my first 2 novels, I follow the path of the story, but I find myself discovering the character and actually shifting and changing the character as I go through the different drafts. So that's me.
How about you, Diane? How does structure and character?
So character is everything to me. In fact, I would start by saying voice is everything to me as a reader, as an editor, and as a writer. I start with voice. When I pick up a book to read, if the voice leaps off the page, then I keep reading. I used to read every book that I started because that was a rule in my family. But after I passed 50, I thought I don't have time to read every book I start. So now, if the voice speaks to me, I keep reading. As an editor, if the voice isn't leaping off the page, that's the first thing to work on. And as a writer, I start with voice, and the voice has to come alive to me. I am aware, though, the whole time of the problem I've set, because I'll start with an embryonic idea. So in my book, The World on Either Side, Valentine is grieving. She cannot recover from the death of her boyfriend. And then the question is, will she? And how will she? So it's all very complicated. He has to.
And
Okay,
those are
so
one of
I'm
the
back.
surprises
Okay.
you might find in a plot. Like something
Yeah.
just jumps out and you can't help but go with it.
Yeah.
No.
And actually, and sorry, I was just going to say, and actually sometimes because then things will change and you want to go with it, that's one of the reasons, that's one of the times when maybe the voice will shift a little bit. You'll go to another level of the voice. You'll go to another level of the character development that you hadn't planned when you were possibly considering it at the beginning.
Which is the fun thing about writing. Did you want to finish off, Diane, with that character?
Thank you so much, guys, for filling in for me. I was just going to say, so the character is everything, but I have an embryonic plot, and the character has to hit the points on the plot. And if that's not happening, then that's when I actually get to work on structure and say, why isn't that happening? What points haven't I hit? And I will say that with my book, I finished it and I sold it, and then I realized, because I had a brilliant editor at Orchid, that my character had not finished her journey. The editor actually said, I'm not sure that Valentine actually finishes the journey of grieving before the second thing happens. And I went, oh my God, that's right. And then I phoned my agent and I said, Sam, Valentine didn't finish her arc. And he went, oh my God, that's right. It was one of those crazy things, and then I solved it with a scene. One of now my favorite scenes in
Is
the
that
novel.
the end where she goes to the shrine? Or?
No, that was all there. It was in the jungle when she realizes that she can stop grieving. She's told a story of how elephant mothers
I got goosebumps.
and she understands that the elephant mother can leave finally the corpse of the dead elephant calf. And she realizes she can also leave
behind. But we won't go any further because we don't want to wreck that amazing story for the people who are going to buy it. Right. Let's move on to another question. So this kind of brings it all together. How does pace, event planning, and exposition kind of impact the structure, which of course would take, a whole course to talk about, but maybe just give a few examples or something like that you could share.
Mm-hmm. So I have one. Okay, so the one that I always talk about is for pace and exposition and all of those questions. Sometimes it can be trial and error, but like for instance, the example I like to give is there's a film that came out a couple of years ago called First Man, and it's about Neil Armstrong, who's a known astronaut, and one of the known facts about him is that he had a child who died when she was 3 years old. And when we tell the story of Neil Armstrong, we never discuss in great detail the fact that he has this child who died when she was 3. But what the film decides to do in order to give emotional context to this character who's very, he's very ordered, he's very, he's highly intelligent, and obviously he's solving these big problems. But to give us a connection to him, the filmmakers decided or chose to include a scene near the beginning, or a series of scenes where you see him struggling with the death of his child. And to me, that's an example of timing of exposition. Now, we could have discovered that later. We could have just been a passing reference, but that particular writer chose to impact us as viewers so that we understand that going forward. And for each of your stories, you can decide, do I want that information to be an undercurrent to the whole story? And do I want it to be an aha moment that comes out maybe halfway through that gives information? Or do I want it to be a neat button at the end? And those are things that you can play with in terms of pacing and exposition. So, yeah.
That is really fascinating because it gives a lot of clues. Like, in this particular panel, we're not saying, okay, you do this, you do this, you do this. What I hear these people trying to help you with is sort of like ideas like to spark solutions, which I really, really like. I think our Q&A is going to go a different direction because we're just getting such great questions right now. I just want to throw them out and they're so pertinent. And I'm going to throw this back at Diane. If you find that your character isn't hitting the points that it needs to in your novel, does that mean that your novel might be trying to answer different questions than you thought? So it kind of almost is your character sabotaging your structure. Like what does that mean, and how do you address it?
So I've only had happy experiences with my characters sabotaging my story because it's usually a better idea than I had. So it has happened to me. I know it sounds maybe a little bit loony to say your character can take over, but at a certain point when I'm writing, I find my characters come alive. And sometimes as I'm writing scenes, because I way back before I was a belly dancer, I was an actress. So I put myself into
well, there you go. Next one.
I put myself into the scene in the character of both or 3 or 4 people in the scene, and I start to just type it out. And sometimes they say things that lead me somewhere that I didn't plan to go. And sometimes I delete it and say, no, we're staying on this path. But if I'm really feeling open and trusting, I go with it. And I can say I've only had really happy experiences when that happens. I love structure, and I love to map my novel, and I love to, as an editor, to look at the structure of a novel or a memoir that I'm editing. But in the end, I do want to go the organic way and let it create itself a bit as it goes along.
Awesome. Okay, we'll go back to the question at hand, which was how does pace and event planning, event placement, and exposition impact the novel structure? And I'll hand that over to you, Paul.
Exposition's a good one because in a high-low, you can't bog down a story. You can't bog down the reader with backstory. The high-low readers just aren't going to take that. So to do backstory, you really have to obey the rule of get in and get out and say what you need to quickly about the character's background, what they've been through, and what brought them to this point. So you really need to make it succinct. That also works with page count and word count because we're dealing with such short things here. Okay. But yeah, in terms of looking at character arc and climax and events, I always think about plot as kind of a forward motion, but also an upward motion. So you're looking at slope like that. Mm-hmm. So every event has to build on the tension and what's going on within the character. So you could even have the same event, and I'll use a kiss. If I put a kiss at the very beginning, if there's one in the middle of the book, how do the stakes go up? How does the tension rise? What makes it more intense for the character, and why is it different this time? So you could even have the same event, and you have to think about, how can I make it stronger? How can I make it more for the character so they learn or do something different in that moment? So that's kind of how I think about it, is we're always looking at that motion.
Cool. Okay, this one wasn't, it's kind of a different question than maybe we had previously discussed, but how do you know when your novel isn't working? How do you know when the structure isn't working? How do you know that, and if the structure isn't working, is this like a death knell for your novel, or can it be saved? Barbara, you look at
Yeah, sorry. It's not a death knell, and yes, it can be saved. I mean, if there's anything I can share with people is, and Diane can attest to this because she has been my editor for the last few years, is I have literally written entire manuscripts and had to, because they weren't working, had to tear them all up and start from scratch or start from a new point. And so, So what I've been doing is, that's why I've been gathering all of these sort of tools of how to use structure to my advantage. But I will say it is unfortunately or fortunately a matter of trial and error. You make your mistakes on the page, you write that story, you take that choice, you go down that road and you see what happens, and you don't consider it a failure if you have to rip up a whole manuscript and start over. And I think that's the death knell for most writers, is they give up because they're like, I keep getting negative feedback. They keep telling me it's not working. But that doesn't mean that you can't go, is there another way I can solve this problem? Is there another journey I can go on with this story? And that's how I got The Dark House into publishing shape. And that's how I got Messenger 93 into publishing shape. I just kept going, okay, I've heard the feedback. I mean, to answer a previous question, sometimes you don't know until you get reader feedback. Sometimes that's the only way of knowing. Sometimes you're too close to it. Sometimes you can tell, sometimes you can use the tool to tell, but sometimes you need reader feedback. And if you're getting reader feedback that it's not working, then you go, okay, I'm gonna pull up my bootstraps after you've done your crying period, and I'm gonna get back to work. So, yeah.
I know I'm the moderator, but I'm going to just answer this question because sort of anecdotal thing, because it happened to me. So it took me a little while to get my sequel done to my first book, and I was finding I was avoiding doing it, writing it. And then I tried to get at it, and it felt like this huge amorphous blob that didn't make any sense. You know, I knew I had these interesting scenes, but I slowly came to realize I really needed to know the direction that novel was going, right? I needed to know what it was about, and I needed to know what I was trying to say. And so I asked myself these questions, and as soon as I honestly answered it, as soon as I got a clear picture of where it needed to go, all of a sudden all the pieces fell in place. Yeah. So I would say if you're struggling with your novel, if you can't get into your own novel, if you're not exactly sure what you're doing, you really need to go back and analyze. And here we're not saying, okay, you need to do this 3-act structure, you need to do this. Though Paul did say that works for him, and that's great. But what you really need to know is what you're trying to say, what this novel is about. You need to answer those basic questions. Just write them out. What is this novel about? What am I trying to say? What is my character trying to say? And if you're really honest with yourself, you know, you're going to start to get that idea of where your structure should start, you know, how to start to build that structure. And I found, like, I'm writing my 3rd novel in this series now. I have it nailed. I know where I know what's happening, and I know where it's going. I mean, I don't have it paragraph or even chapter, but I have this clear sort of pole star of where I know where it's going, and that's kind of where I think, okay, the structure's in place. Now I can do all the fun stuff, you know, go with my characters. And it's not like you can't change things. Like, you might have a character that comes on and then, or something happens, but you can incorporate it into that structure. A good structure can really handle, you know, little alterations in characters or changes. It can handle that. So that is my own experience. Sorry to...
No, it's great.
Can I jump in with a tip, though,
Yeah.
for assessing? Yeah. I'm very visual, and I need that visual to assess things. Yeah. So I actually use Post-its, and it's something that I learned from Susan Juby, so I'm giving her full credit here.
Okay.
And the main plot points, I put down a central line. And I need everything to flow down that line. Anything that's not hitting that line and moving that action forward goes off to the side. And those are the things I assess on if I can tie them in, or if those are writing that's just for me as the author. So they're teaching me more about my characters, or they're teaching me more about the story and themes. But I actually do need that physical layout, and I need to see it. And then I need the Post-its because I can move them around all over the place.
I do Post-its too. I absolutely do Post-its too. I basically just label them. This is what happens here. This is what happens here. And I've got them on my wall. I've got them in, like, I take notepads and I put the Post-its in the notepads so I can carry it around with me. Not so much now at COVID, but yeah, Post-its are great.
And I've taken over a dining room table because I needed to actually stand over and be like, what am I looking at here?
Yeah. Same.
So you arrange your Post-its, and then it kind of locks in place, right? And when it locks
well,
in place,
you can see if it's on that track. You can see if it's on that story track, or if it's not.
Yeah.
And if it's not, how do we tie it back in?
Yeah.
Or maybe we get rid of it. And, you know, we're just throwing away a Post-it.
I've written many scenes that I took days, months to write. Love them. But when you have a clear picture of where you're going, you suddenly realize they're extraneous, right? Yes. And as beautiful and gorgeous as they are, which is, for me, the hardest job as an author, you know, is to cut those away. Yeah. It's just so sad. Oh, this is really awesome, guys. Thanks. I have a really cool question in the Q&A. So this person asked, are there specific structures within the YA genre that's different than, you know, the other genres? Is there something peculiar to YA, would you say? I think.
I'll take that.
Oh, you go.
Sorry. I would say there are many things peculiar to YA, not necessarily structure, but there are things you have to hit in YA. Obviously, it has to be about somebody between 13 and 18. That's a little on the old side, but 18 will do. It has to be, they call it a first problem. So your first time in love, or your first heartbreak, or your first whatever. And you have to follow an arc where if there are certain problems have to be properly processed. You can't have, for instance, you can't raise the issue of mental illness without fully and comprehensively exploring it. You can't have, for instance, a suicide without a suicide attempt or a character who commits suicide without a full evaluation of that, because these books are important in that they're for kids who are reading them, and you have to be very careful with what you're saying to kids. So you need that extra level of consciousness that these are going to young people, and you have to be very careful with your message. So that's not really structure, but those are specific requirements of YA.
And I would also add to that, and this is a little bit like what Paul was saying earlier, that the scenes really should all be show versus tell in YA. So rather than having like a whole bunch of, backstory or culminations of events or synopses or whatever of things that have happened, everything that you want to have in the story is something that you're going to be showing in a scene, as opposed to something that's been summed up the way you might do for adult. So I really think that's and specificity. So if you have to introduce backstory and you want to do it very quickly, as Paul said earlier, if you're very specific about how you convey that information, you don't need a lot of words to describe. We'll understand what it is. I don't have an example offhand, but hopefully you understand what I mean.
Yeah. Paul, we got a question here directly for you in the Q&A. And the question is, Paul, since your novel style is so succinct, do you find you omit certain things that are no longer longer novels don't, or do you just shorten things? I guess YA.
Yeah, so a high-low, I find approaching it like a short story really worked well for me.
Oh, cool.
Having a strong outline, having strong characters. I didn't have to omit because I kind of kept a central trajectory and went right through. But to circle back to what Diane and Barbara were talking about, YA is always the issue of becoming for me. And it's, you're not a child anymore and you're not an adult. So you're in that transition, and that's kind of what adolescence is. So in thinking about becoming, that's always kind of a central problem to a YA novel. So how does the character become who they are? Yeah. That's a really great one. And someone did raise the point, don't get rid of, I said throw away a Post-it. Don't get rid of your excess writing. It's so worthwhile, but it might be something that's there to teach you or for another project, or it might inform later. It just might not make it in the final draft.
Awesome. Okay, I guess we're getting down to our final 10 minutes. Let me think, what's a quick question? What happens so we'll just talk about this one for 5 minutes, then we'll wrap up. And we'll reveal the 2 interesting facts left. Anyway, what happens if you don't make that effort to structure your novel? I kind of answered that, but like maybe from your point of view, what have you seen? As editors, as a high-low writer?
I'll take it as an editor, a novel that starts to ramble, that gets lost. And you can just spot it right away. What's like the scene isn't related to the scene before. A good structured novel has a domino effect. So one thing happens, another thing happens, another thing happens, and they happen because of the thing before. So I just read a novel recently. We considered taking it on at the Rights Factory, but things were happening in isolation, just popping up, not the
Domino.
Yeah. So that's what happens. At the end, you're asking yourself, why was this scene here? Why was this scene here? What's this character about? In life, which is messy, you have a ton of people that aren't related to your main story, and a lot of things can happen that aren't related to the main story, but you cannot have that in a novel.
Well, and I will even just jump off that. In life, exactly. But if you were at a dining room table and you were talking about something with your friends and you were, intimate and having fun and, sharing things, even in your own verbal storytelling, you're going to choose which facts to tell those people related to that story, as opposed to going into your whole, everything that ever happened to you. But it's interesting to me also as an outside reader, how often I see what Diane was talking about, which is that rambling thing of things not being connected. So I would definitely, if you're writing and you're looking at your novel, look for that domino effect, because if it's not there, and so many stories do not have it, that are not published. And that was my biggest learning curve as a writer, was learning how to do that and how important that was. You're talking about that story, not all the things that could happen to that person.
And that's hard when you're a first writer, because you have so many things you want to say.
Yes, exactly.
And you just want to get it out there.
Exactly.
Okay, Paul, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, I did. If you're meandering, and that's kind of what not having a plot structure, not having that upward momentum is doing, you're going to lose your readers. And that really is the risk you're running. They will just put down the book and stop reading. And that's really scary to an author. You want to find your readership. You want people to invest, but you need to give them the payoff. And structure does give them a sense of payoff. It does give them a sense of progression. And especially if you're dealing with readers who aren't book readers, like a high-low reader maybe, is just not someone who's a reader. They haven't found that book to hook them. They will put down the book more easily. I don't think any of us have the room to lose our readers.
Mm-hmm.
That must be a very demanding audience to write for, Paul. Like you have to.
They're super smart. They just,
Don't bore me.
there's so
Don't
many
bore me.
demands on their time. They don't necessarily want a book demanding their time. So you really have to hook them and keep them.
Okay. All right. We're down to our last 5 minutes. I can't believe how fast this went.
Wow.
Thanks for all the great questions in the Q&A. We didn't stick to the structure I said, but I think it worked okay. So we'll everybody, just tell us where we can find you on the internet. Any last things you want to say? And again, about your interesting fact, if you like. Though we already know a few of you have filled it. All right. Let's start with Diane.
So yes, I'm the belly dancer, but I already admitted that. Yes, it has no relationship to my work as a writer, though. So unfortunately, one day I may write a story about a belly dancer. So just last words to leave the audience with. Mapping your novel is crucial, but you cannot lose the core, the emotional core that you have with this story. So that's the number one. And then you work that around the arc and the points and the plot points, the pinch points, the middle point, the all is lost moment, the main things of a story. Don't lose the emotional core.
You need the heart.
You need the heart. Thank you, Liz. That's saying it much better.
No, it's what your novel's all about. It's got this big, massive beating heart. Oh, it's a great book. Okay, Barbara.
Yeah, so I would say also as a parting word, because I think joy of writing is so important, but I also think that a lot of writers, new writers, will get so easily discouraged that they will not allow themselves to inhabit their true feeling that they are writers. You are right. If you want to write, you are a writer, right? You might not be a published author, but you are a writer. And just like nobody would expect me to pick up a violin and go, oh, I love music so much and I listen to it all the time and I can play this violin perfectly. There's also the process of learning your craft. And that might take a long time. It might take, it's certainly going to take a few years. So I'm going to advise you to enjoy that time, enjoy that learning curve, take every feedback that you get, as difficult as it might be from time to time, as a gift, and that you're fine tuning your craft, but you are a writer, and use that joy to connect with that and allow yourself to explore your words on the page for the rest of your life. And in terms of how to find me, I have a website, barbararadecki.com. You can link to the sign up for a newsletter. As I said, you can subscribe to this YouTube channel that I'm going to, that exists, but I haven't really done yet. And maybe I'll do these 1-minute blurbs. And you can certainly find my books at bookstores and on Amazon. Thank you.
Thank you. Paul.
Yeah, if you've written it and you feel the plot is lacking, you can make it better. That's with any element of your book. You can always improve. And being a writer is always being a state of improvement. Every time an editor gives you feedback or someone says, work on this, treat it as a gift. Treat it as they're seeing more that you have to offer and give them more. Don't take it as discouragement. And I know that's very hard because rejection is not fun. I've dated, I know. So.
Okay. All right.
Oh, I was the voice of Sailor Neptune. I was the voice of Sailor Neptune. Sorry, that was my secret. Yeah.
There you
And
go.
I'm the baker.
Paul makes amazing macaroons, and I want to try one day. And I won the 2003 Polish Princess Contest at a family reunion. Now, technically, they said everybody who competed won, but my father-in-law, who was the judge, said I won.
Oh.
You can find me at www.elizabethwhitton.com. And Paul, we can find you at?
www.paulcoccia.com, and I'm at Paul J. Coccia on social media, and Diane.
Oh,
you can-
awesome.
yeah,
I
you-
had so much fun. You guys, I'm so glad I got to know you. You're all so talented, and everybody read their books. They're amazing books, and you will just learn even from reading their books how to structure your novel, because they're perfect examples of how to do it. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Liz.
and thank you when words collide.
Yes,
Yes,
thank you.
That's
Thank
right.
you.
Everybody, go enjoy all the panels at When Words Collide.
Yes.
It's just a great conference this year. I can't believe how it pulled together. Take care.
Thank you.